I'm delighted not just to be able to speak today at Cardus to deliver this keynote, but to deliver this keynote in the 25th year of the Van Pelt and Pennings partnership that has given rise to such a rich program here at Cardus. If it's been 25 years, that must mean I'm in my 50s, almost 60. Is that right? Time has flown. I don't want to point any fingers at either of you, but that must mean time has marched on. But I think by their works, we know them on a program of research and of engagement that goes across community and faith, work and the marketplace, education, marriage, and the family. The program here at Cardus sustains great hope, I think, for the future of the country and for the future of our life together, and engages Canadians of many backgrounds, which is all the more valuable today than it was 25 years ago, where I think the opportunities to do that have otherwise declined. And I look forward to, if the good Lord gives us 25 more years of the engagement. I appreciate that. But as an educator, if I may say, in addition to that, we're very lucky at the university to produce, to come into contact with, I don't want to say we produce, to come in contact with hundreds of great students every year. The high schools of the country give us thousands of students that we do our best to educate, not always superbly across the board, but our best to educate. But there's only every so often, so many years, the gold medal student that comes along to write the honors thesis. And I appreciate that at a point where we worry about our students after they graduate, where Andrea had come to a point in her life where she needed a bigger challenge, that Cardus was the institution that stepped in to give her that bigger challenge. That it's after many reasons to be grateful for other things I've done in life, I'm grateful that our students get opportunities to come to places like this to continue on with their education. So I really want to thank you for them. I'm going to take it as commonplace in this group. I don't think in a Cardus group I have to argue the case for collapsing levels of trust in our institutions. I assume that's why we have the event here today. So I'm not going to go through all the polling evidence. I'm not going to go through all of the other social sciences evidence we have that people don't trust Parliament as much as they have, the parties, the police, the armed forces, the professions, business institutions, the universities and schools. There's almost no institution in society that's been left untouched by not just a collapse of confidence, but an accelerating decline of confidence in institutions, particularly since the end of the COVID pandemic. Why is this decline going on? The social sciences literature and the public commentary offers us many possibilities as to why. Some explanations of this start with the failures of our leaders, that the leaders of our institutions have made mistakes. Many of their mistakes are mistakes of arrogance. Many of their mistakes are grievous mistakes with grievous results for society. And I have to say, for this school of thought of explaining collapse of confidence, there are many proof points. I'm not going to go through them all. The people who argue that it's the failure of leaders that have led to the collapse of trusted institutions have many, many, many points to substantiate their case. The pandemic alone provided many. I'm not going to go through them all because we can fill in for ourselves. There's a group who thinks that new social media technologies have eroded sources of authority, that have made our society more transparent and permanently transparent. Everything that everybody does is on display permanently, that there's nothing that can be hidden, and that since there's nothing that can be hidden, there's no mystery, there are no gatekeepers, to put it a different way, and that this has led to the collapse. Now that we can see everything that goes on in institutions in real time on Twitter or whatever, that there being no more mystery, there could be no more confidence in institutions. And on this school of thought as well, there are many proof points. I regret to say that the people who make these arguments, there's evidence for this school of thought. They're not wrong. There are others who will argue that it's all the cause of misinformation and disinformation by deliberately malevolent actors. Either they're foreign actors, in which case we can despise them because they're not with us, or more damagingly, they're domestic actors with malicious intent to try to bring down institutions and to level society. I regret there are also many proof points on this school of thought as well. I'm not going to try and evaluate the weight of all of these contending explanations for why there's been a decline. I think that's missing the forest for the trees. What I did want to do was to reach for a moment for the historian Neil Ferguson, who I think gives us a slightly bigger picture of what this looks like. That's good for historians, to give us the bigger picture. By reaching back, they can reach forward. A formula for thinking about all of it. In his book, The Tower and the Square, he writes that we no longer live in a world where institutions, towers, can tower over society, that we no longer live in a world of vertical up and down authority and the centralizing power that comes with institutions that lord out above us, that institutions across the world are in retreat, and that we now live in more of the medieval world of the village square, where everything is equal, everything is flatter. We're in a world of networks, peer-to-peer relations, that the vertical up-down of the world of the vertical institution is giving way to another era of flatter institutions, or flatter networks. Seen in this way, I think Ferguson provokes the idea it might not be the failures or imperfections of our leaders that have caused collapse in institution. It could be that people have always long been imperfect beings. Our leaders no more than followers. It could be that the imperfections of the past are now on broader public display on a peer-to-peer basis. And that part, I think the social media explanation has something to be said of it. That the central determination of what is true, what is knowledge, and the setting of boundaries of public debate, once curated by institutions, but also a source of power for institutions to set the terms of the discourse. This is no longer a reliable guide to policing our world in common, our life together. No one trusts institutional truth claims anymore, it seems. On the right, you can see it, vaccines, gender transition, environmental problems, the authoritative explanation by institutions of what these problems entail and what the permissible solutions are to these problems could be set centrally. Nobody on the right of the political spectrum would accept that anymore, nor on the left would anybody accept the need for institutions to define that we need social order, the enforcement of criminal law, some sense of personal responsibility, an obligation of hard work. All of these institutional truths of the past now give way to questioning from the left. The American political philosopher Yuval Levin worries, and I think rightly so, that institutions, as they give way to a world of networks, mean that we're losing a valuable character-forming function of institutions, that institutions help to form us into better people than we are born, that institutions no longer can exercise that kind of character-forming function for society. I think there's something to this, that institutions have become a performative space for bad actors and have reinforced the vicious circle of the collapse of trust in institutions. But I don't want to take Levin's argument too far here. If I can go back to Neil Ferguson, life in the square, life in the network, it forms its character in different ways. It's not right to say that with the collapse of institutions, there's no more place for character formation. I just think that's not a good reading of our history together. Life in the network, for example, forces us to accept our human God-given equality as citizens in a more fundamental and forceful way. If you meet people face to face, peer to peer in the community square, you're forced to accept their equal humanity to your own. That, reinforced through the power of the network, is a character-forming trait in its own. I think Levin, if I put that to him, would accept that that's a characteristic of the network. But the question then is, if there are no more up-down vertical institutions that can centrally decide for us what is true and what is false and what the permissible terms of debate are, in the network, the question is, who do we trust? It's up to ourselves to decide who we trust, which authorities we're going to follow. And trust goes to the people who have worked hard to earn our trust, not the people who are resting on trust that was earned in the past, trust that was earned through some institutional means. The survival of trust has to be renewed every day in the network. So yes, if I could argue contra Levin, yes, Certainly institutions form character, but so do networks. Think of the ancient church, the early church, more of a network than an institution. We can't say that the early church fathers did nothing to form character, that they had no impact because they didn't have Rome or they didn't have Vatican Curia to promulgate their truth. There was a different approach. It had a character forming nature to it. I would say that the key trait of the network, the key character trait of the network, though, is not to accept our human equality with each other, is to accept humility. The primary character trait of the network is humility, a mutual recognition of our fallen, and I know it's redundant in this case to say fallen, but I think it's important in this context to say fallen, our mutual fallen humanity. When we meet people in the square, when we meet people in the network, we are meeting them in the fullness of their humanity, understanding that they are frail, that their human reason is frail, that their human perceptions are frail, and that nonetheless we have to form a life together. Now, I can tell by the look on Andrew's face, she wants me to get back to the topic of governing. So I will. Let me follow up on lunch. For those of you who are here for the lunch discussion. Government by consent of the governed, which is the core precept of a liberal political order, is government by humility. The corollary, you cannot approach the project of governing with arrogance in a society where the consent of the governed is required. You cannot approach government with arrogance in the governance of a free society. And this is why this collapse of institutions, or we're in a transition, I think, perhaps, of new institutions emerging. I'm not pessimistic about this. I'm worried, of course, but I'm not pessimistic about this process because it's an opportunity for us all to be a little bit humble about the collapse of some institutions that we took for granted and which we might have benefited from their existence. And their collapse forces us to go back and rethink again what we're about and what our standing is in the world. So I have 3 suggestions for government here. First of all, the first principle here of governing through this period of reduced or collapsed confidence institutions. There's a limit to which government can correct society. Not just that there's a limit to which government should try to correct society, but there's a limit to how much government can even accomplish the basic goals of correcting society. Government will not make us equal in wealth. It will not make us equal in wisdom or in performance or in beauty or in brains, no matter how hard the government tries. This is the fool's errand. Government cannot make us any more equal than being equal citizens. That, I think, is a liberal truth, if I could go back to lunch. And I think that is a truth of our faiths together. At the heart of the town square, to go back to Ferguson's analogy here, is the marketplace. The artisans market, the farmers market, the place where people come to buy and sell their wares, where all the physical necessities of life can be bought and sold at a price, and if it's organized properly, enriches the society along the way. But at the head of the town square is the church, or the mosque, or the synagogue, or some building that over time has filled 2 or 3 of those roles, a building that might have been around for several centuries. To the side of the town square is a school. If it's a great town square for a great town, there might be a university. The square is for courting potential mates and for wooing potential mates, full of married couples with children who are themselves at some point advancing towards marriage. The public square might also include some sports, because sports too has a role. So my first lesson of governance in this world of collapsed institutions: humility and the promise of politics. Government will not make us perfect. There are other things in life other than politics. At a certain point, we have to back away from the partisanship to live a private life that's fully human. We're not going to get that through the political world. My second lesson in this, or my second advice in this, humility in the operation of government. In governing, be sparing with the public purse and with public resources. Focus on delivering the basics of life. I don't hold him out to be a role model on most things, because I don't think he is a role model on most things. But the Elon Musk question has something to it. Explain to me 5 things you did last week while you were in the service of the public. It's a simple rule, and I would apply it with some humility as well. If somebody only accomplished one thing for the public good last week while they were in the public employment, every so often we'll forgive somebody who only gets one thing done. If they only get 2 things done, but they did them well, that's great. If they accomplished 5 things and it was a bit ratty around the edges, well, we'll accept that as a C effort. That's not cause for being fired. But we do want to, I think, start with our public officials in asking, are there 5 things you did for the public good last week? Musk question here is not a bad place to start. I would only add to the Musk question, if you are working in the public sphere, if you're working for the public good, make mistakes and rejoice in the making of mistakes, because that is how you learn. It's part of humility is to accept that you have made mistakes in pursuit of the public good. Not everything that you think is in the public good works out that way. If you want my list of mistakes I made while I was in the Prime Minister's office, I'm working on it, but I'll never finish it. It's an infinite book. Be aware of the mistakes that you've made. And then the third piece, humility in speech. Governing is a verbal activity. I learned this from a professor years ago, from whom I'm not sure I learned much else, but I did learn one thing. John Shigler, he's gone now at McGill, but I sat through a year of his class, and he's a scattered man, and not sure how much else I learned, but I did learn that governing is a function of speech. We govern in words. He used to say, people complain that politics is nothing but talk. He said, government is nothing but talk either, but talk is all there is. You pass legislation, it's nothing but talk. You issue orders on behalf of cabinet, it's nothing but talk. You give instructions to public servants, you campaign for election, it's nothing but talk is all we have to govern ourselves with, and thank goodness it's just enough. But when I say we have to govern in speech, I mean in persuasive speech. It's 10 times more important to be persuasive in the public square than it is in the world of the tower. The life of the institution, the life of the tower, speech is pronouncement from on high. Life in the network requires persuasion. If we're going to accept our fellow citizens as our equals in citizenship, we have to persuade them. We can't pronounce to them. And that means investing time in relationships where you establish a reputation for speaking truth and speaking with credibility. That is best accomplished by acknowledging your mistakes. There are some people here, I think, from Ottawa. Are some of you live here full time? The dominant mode of government communication is communication by pronouncement, transmitting or conveying messages devised by thousands of communications professionals. This stuff is not done by a handful of people behind a closed door. There's thousands of people on the federal government payroll who do this, thousands more at the provincial level, thousands more at the municipal level. Every government agency has a communications staff, and most of what they produce is garbage. I hate to say it, but it's true. I don't mean to demean other people's professions. Anybody who works in an honest job for a living deserves their measure of respect. But let me ask the Ottawa peeps here, how many Canadians follow the Twitter account of a government department? Vanishingly few. For the most part, only people who are paid to do so. How many follow a government Twitter account for actual information, for help, for guidance, for advice, or even for authorized knowledge? If you see something on a government department's Twitter account, can you take it to the bank as true? No, anybody who follows a government Twitter account knows that that's not the case. Nobody follows a government Twitter account. How many of you follow a government Twitter account to see a government Twitter account acknowledge a mistake that the department made? I've read, I don't know, millions of government tweets in my life. Millions. It must be millions. How many government tweets have I read? Millions. Have I ever read one that acknowledged a mistake? I have never read one that acknowledged a mistake. Everything is great. In the world of Twitter, government communications, everything is always a success. So let me end my little preliminary discussion here about governance in an age of collapsed trust in institutions on a very Cardus note, I hope. Governing in an age of collapsed confidence in institutions means acknowledging that we're fallen humans, that we make mistakes. Honesty about the mistakes we have made is the hardest thing for humans, and it appears to be especially difficult for political leaders, and appears to be, by my brief statistical encounter, impossible for a government communications official. We want our leaders to be gods. I don't think at a Cardus event, the problem of this human tendency is unknown. It was not unknown to the people of the Bible. That's why we are commanded not to erect false gods. That's why after the resurrection, we were commanded not to follow false prophets. We understand that it's something deep in human nature that needs to be fixed, that we need to erect false gods, that we need to erect false gods that we can accept as true, that we need to erect false gods whose authority we can accept with therefore having to think for ourselves. If I had one fix to leave you with for governing in the era of declined faith in or confidence in institutions, we have to start by allowing our political leaders to admit when they have made a mistake. They are reluctant to do that because of us. It's not some character flaw on the part of our political leaders. A worry that if we admit that something went wrong, that we spent $1 billion and didn't get anything for it, that we launched a legislative initiative and it fell flat, that we tried to accomplish something and it backfired. The reason why political leaders are reluctant to admit this sort of thing is because they think that we will condemn them for it. And you know what? For the most part, we do. Mistakes, instead of being human, are evidence of evil intent or a conspiracy of some sort. Maybe it's at the World Economic Forum, maybe it's at some subsidiary organization, but there must be a nefarious effort behind it. On the contrary, political leaders are like us and they make mistakes. My advice to political leaders is to take up the opportunity of humility. Try to admit the mistake. On occasion, when political leaders do admit they've made a mistake, I find that for the most part, they survive it. Look, it is not a partisan environment here. I don't want to turn it into a partisan environment. I spent many years trying to explain why I didn't think the carbon tax was a very good idea. Lo and behold, along comes the party that gives the carbon tax, and I think they've admitted they made a mistake. I'm not condemning them for that. I may wish there were some electoral consequences for that, but whatever. I'm not going to condemn them for that. They figured out what the correct answer was and made their mistake. They haven't admitted it was a mistake yet. Someday, at some point, we might get to that. The humility and the promise of politics, humanity in the practice of politics, and humility in the speech about politics is the solution to giving us some space to build some new institutions with some new faith. There's something to Levin's argument that we can't survive without those institutions. The network is not quite enough. And give us some space to rebuild here. Michael, that's all I've got.